Alright guys, today we're going to talk about reform movements in America. What I need you to do is go on and have your colored pencils ready, because you need to mark the things that I mark on here. You're welcome to pause the video if you need to go over things or whatever. So anyway, please follow with me. The U.S. grew and changed during the early 1800s. Some of these changes were in the ways people thought about things. What were the ideas of two groups of people who wanted to reform life in America? No, there were not only two groups of people who were thinkers. A lot of people were thinking. Don't be confused with Jessica, because we know she doesn't. But anyway, one of these groups was working very hard to end slavery. William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, Freddie G., and Harriet Tubman were called abolitionists, who demanded the immediate freeing of all slaves in the United States. And that's what an abolitionist is, or was. They demanded the immediate freeing of all slaves in the U.S. They believed slavery was morally wrong. It was cruel and inhumane. I think we can all agree with that is true. They also saw it as a violation of the principles of democracy, which stated that all persons or people were equal under the law. If you're taking somebody and enslaving them and not allowing them to be free, obviously they are not being treated equally. I think we could all agree there. So take a second, pause this, and think about these things. With abolitionists, they wanted slavery to end everywhere. Think about these items too, that it was wrong. Slavery is wrong. It's cruel. People were being beaten. They weren't listening. Inhumane. What's it mean if something's inhumane? What word can you pull out of that? Human. If it's inhumane, people they're being treated less than human. And then think about democracy. The principles of democracy, saying that people rule the government. We have a right to freedom and to choose and things like that. If you're enslaving a person, they are not equal and not having that freedom. So let's talk about our first abolitionist there from the list, William Lloyd Garrison. He was a writer and editor who thought that all enslaved African Americans should be emancipated or freed. Box that in. That's what emancipated means, is freed. Immediately. Not in a couple years, not next week. Now. And he published an anti-slavery newspaper called The Liberator, and believed that slaves were Americans and entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Fun fact, I think I saw one of you guys talked about him burning a copy of the Constitution. Think about that for a second. Why would he burn a copy of the Constitution? Think about that. And his newspaper called Liberator. What does this word mean? Liberate. It means free, or freedom. So very fitting. Now pause the video again, and I want you to find William Lloyd Garrison. Alright, next we're going to talk about Frederick Douglass. While some abolitionists like Garrison wrote against slavery, some like Frederick Douglass gave speeches. Frederick Douglass was a runaway slave who escaped from his owner by disguising himself as a sailor and boarding a train headed for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Before long, he was asked by abolitionists to speak out about his experiences as a slave. He soon became a leading spokesperson for the abolition of slavery and racial equality. What's a spokesperson? Think about that for a second. You ever seen Ronald McDonald? Or Colonel Sanders? They're the spokespeople for McDonald's. and KFC. They represent those restaurants. So he was a spokesperson or a representative of the abolitionist movement. In addition to being one of America's first great African-American speakers, Frederick Douglass also founded an anti-slavery newspaper called The North Star, another fitting name, follow the North Star. They believe we follow that to freedom. He spent the rest of his life working for rights that would improve the lives of both African Americans and women. Fun fact about Frederick Douglass, something very illegal that he was able to do. Read and write. Big no-no. Alright, pause your video, find Frederick Douglass, and let's glue him either here or over on the left-hand side in the other notes, or the back of the other note page. Alright, your last abolitionist leader we'll talk about, Harriet Tubman. I know you've been hearing about her for years. Abolitionist leaders also included brave women like Harriet Tubman. Tubman was born a slave in Maryland in the 1800s. If you don't know where Maryland is, it is just above Virginia. At the age of 30, she feared that she was going to be sold to another plantation, so she ran away. With the help of the North Star, and a kind white woman, she traveled north to Philadelphia in freedom. Let's think about this a second. A kind white woman. Clearly somebody helped her out. Another big no-no. Over the next 10 years, she traveled south 19 times to escort over 300 enslaved African Americans to freedom. She is the most well-known conductor of the Underground Railroad. Now, do not be confused, Kaylee. I'm sure you will be. The Underground Railroad was not a subway system. Like in New York City, it was not a railroad that ran underground. She didn't really conduct or drive a train. This was the name given to their system of sneaking or running slaves from the south up to freedom in the north. Conductors simply helped that along. They were leaders. Cool. Pause your video. Find Harriet Tubman and glue her here or over on the other side. Alright, the second group of reformers. And that just brought me to another thing we need to do. We need to circle this word reform. What does it mean to reform something? Thinking? Come on, Savannah, think about it. If you reform something, you want it to change. Think about Play-Doh or dough. You form the Play-Doh or you form the dough. You don't like how it was formed, so you reform it. You do it again. So the first group was trying to change slavery. This group is looking for some women's rights to be changed. The second group, who wanted to reform life in America, declared that all men and women are created equal. Supporters of the suffrage movement believed that women were being deprived of their basic rights. Deprived just means they weren't given something. During the 1800s, women weren't allowed to vote. In addition, married women could not own property, and any wages they earned were handed over to their husbands. What this means, guys, wages is if they worked a job, say they were a tutor or cleaned a house or something like that, and they got paid $50. That $50 would be handed over to the husband. They were also denied equal opportunities in business. Women who worked outside the home often worked long hours in factories. They taught school, ran boarding houses, or were employed as a seamstress. Educational opportunities were also limited. We should definitely know that. Educational opportunities. Couldn't go to school. Women were taught how to read and write. Okay, not bad. However, look at this. We're not allowed to attend high school or college. Fail. The suffrage movement was led by determined women who worked before and after the Civil War to gain equality for American women. What's this word, determined? If you are determined to do something, what does that mean? It means you're going to work very hard to get something done. 3 of these brave women were Isabel Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Isabel Sojourner Truth was born a slave in the state of New York. At the age of 30, she was freed and became a traveling preacher. Before long, she was also a popular speaker for the women's suffrage movement. Large crowds would come to hear her speak about women's rights and the evils of slavery. This former enslaved African American became nationally known as an advocate or supporter of equality and justice. And she gave a very famous speech. I'm going to let you listen to it soon. It's called, "Ain't I a Woman?" Really good, very moving. Also, you should know that her name was not Sojourner Truth. She changed it to this. A sojourner is a traveler, and obviously truth means you're telling the facts. So what she did is she would travel around, like I said, a traveling preacher. She would travel around telling truth and the evils of slavery and how women were treated unfairly. Pause the video, find Sojourner Truth, and glue her down. Next, I know you've all heard of this woman. Susan B. Anthony was a teacher who dedicated her life to the women's suffrage movement. She crisscrossed the nation speaking out on women's rights. She campaigned for the right to vote, the right to own property, the right to equal pay, and equal educational opportunities for all. Miss Lee would have been her BFF. Eventually, she even convinced a university in New York to admit women. In 1979, the United States government honored her work for women's rights by minting $1 coins with her picture on them. Pause your video, find her picture, and glue it down. Alright, last but not least is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. As a leader of the suffrage movement, Elizabeth Cady Stanton helped organize the first Women's Rights Convention. What that is, a convention, guys, is like a big gathering of people. They came together and talked about how women were being treated unfairly. And this convention marked the beginning of the women's rights movement in the United States. Those that attended wanted women to enjoy the same rights as men. They applauded Stanton's speech, which added the words to the Declaration of Independence by saying all men and women are created equal. I think we've come a long way here in 2016, but I still don't think that women are treated quite the same as men as far as work goes and things, opportunities. It's kind of sad. Hopefully by the time you guys are adults, all that will be taken care of. Anyway, another fun yet sad fact. Susan B. Anthony, someone who worked so hard for these women's rights, her work led to the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. I'll write that on here. 19th Amendment. Guess what that amendment, or that change to the Constitution did? Gave women the right to vote. Like I said, unfortunately, she died before that amendment happened, but it was because of her work. Alright, that's going to be the end of your video. Find Elizabeth Cady Stanton and glue her down.